Good morning. Welcome to Make Saints. I'm Drew Downs, and this one is called It's 1,000 Things. Now, this episode is a spiritual successor to last week's episode, which was an exploration of our propensity in the West to isolate and reduce things down to a single idea and then think, oh man, that's just how all things are. And when we do that, it has a way of letting us miss the forest for the trees, as it were. So this one is similar to this. This is about the forest that we're missing for the tree, right? And it revolves around this one moment in time. I think it was around 2017 or 18, and it was one of those days in the aftermath of that purely American experience of a mass shooting, and similarly to the great shame of all Americans and people all over the world. It's hard to remember which one. That is almost more shameful, because it reveals something deep and wrong in our body politic. And I do remember the circumstances, just not the names. And I invited, but I was particularly amped about it because this was one that revealed the lie. It revealed the lie after Sandy Hook of doing nothing, of pretending there was nothing we could do. It's all lies. And so I called my congressman and I wrote something on Facebook and Twitter, and I would say this is my hard line in the sand. Like we have this is too much. All of it is, you can see it's all lies. It's time to do something. I will not accept nothing as a solution. Something has to be done. And I came into church. This was a Friday. It was like dinner time. This was happening 5 o'clock rush hour, busiest time of the day at a mall. And but I came. That was a Friday, and I came into church that Sunday. Still, everyone's still reeling, and there was a man, gentleman, sweet man. I loved him to death, and he was sitting at a table, and he said, he did this move where he puts his hand up and backs away. I know what you're thinking. And we're going, and so, I just want to pause here before I finish what he said, and say there are a few things that crank me up to 11. There are a few phrases in the English language and Western culture, whatever. There are a few things that take me from 0 to 11 in one twist of the dial, and one of the few phrases is that one. I know what you're thinking, and I find it insulting. I find it deeply morally wrong at a fundamental level, and I find it to be a violation. Like there's a real violating character in this, which is to say, I don't care what you actually will say because I know what you're thinking, and I find that to be among the grossest things a person can say to another person. So it gets me. So he was saying, I know what you're thinking, but we're going to have to agree to this. And before he could finish, I had to interrupt him. I said, you don't know what I'm thinking. It's 1,000 things. Now, he didn't have a response to this, and I reiterated this. He said, it's 1,000 things. I don't want one thing done. I want us to figure out how to do several of these things together. But he was trying to say, I don't want to talk. I get where you are, and respectfully, no conversation today. And I respected that. But I want to highlight something about this, right? Which is this only happens. He only feels comfortable doing this if we look at our world as if there are two buckets. And what you do is you fill these two buckets with binary stereotypes. And they tend to be stereotypes that are oppositional in response to each other. So if one person likes a thing, the other bucket is filled with things that prove that how you're not supposed to like that thing, right? And that ends up being how we fill our binary buckets. And so if someone has the audacity to speak something that triggers your memory of things that go in that bucket, you then can feel comfortable assigning that bucket to them and saying, you are that bucket, and all the things in that bucket must be what you believe. And by the way, I get to tell what's in that bucket, right? We do this to one another, and it is gross. And so if you learn anything from this, just stop assigning buckets. Just stop doing that. That's the first thing. Stop filling buckets and pretending that this is okay. So this is what we're talking about, and he thinks he can do this, and this is the other piece. This is the part why the binary bucket thing comes to bear, because it's no big deal. In our world, we think of things and very easily, and it helps us capture conversations and feel like we're able to have these conversations across party lines, and that's how we describe it. See it the other way. Notice this language is always focused on a binary situation, but it never focuses on the fact that most of these situations aren't actually binary and reflect a whole host of, dare we say, 1,000 different ideas. When he says, however, we'll have to agree to disagree, he's not doing this as a friend to preserve the relationship, as if that in itself is what's on the table at the moment. It need not be on the table. He's saying it because he thinks that we can choose to not have the conversation. And I specifically said in my post that part of this avoiding of conversation is part of what gets us into the trouble. So it's the fact that we didn't do anything. It's the fact that we didn't, we have the conversation in public and we shout at each other and then we don't do anything. We fundamentally agree to disagree. And how does that work in this case? It means more people get shot. Because it means preserving the status quo. And the status quo, I've declared, is unworkable. We're not having that conversation. And the reason we need that conversation is precisely because it's not binary. It's 1,000 things. So similarly, there was a conversation that I heard on a podcast just a few weeks ago that sort of relates in the same ballpark of this, and that is it was around universal basic income, and this study was done in, I don't remember where, because there was another study that was done in Montreal. Maybe this was in Toronto, and they were giving $1,000 out to all the people in this one part of the group, and they had a control group that got like $50 or something. And what they wanted to study was if the money itself created a lasting long-term impact. They didn't want to look at the systems. They didn't want to look at the bigger picture. They just wanted to see if giving people this money for a certain amount of time would have itself a lasting impact on people. And what they found is that it did not demonstrate that it had a statistically significant impact. It had a statistically significant impact for the first 6 months, but after that, not. They kept with them for a couple of years, and they found that they were tended to be living in the same circumstances that they lived in before. What frustrated me was as much as I understand what they were trying to do, I found it frustrating that they didn't recognize the limits or speak directly to what they were limiting in their study, and therefore how that would play in relationship to the rest of it. Which is to say that if you, for instance, have a person in low income housing and you give them $1,000 a month for a year, they no longer qualify for low income housing. And if you're not doing something about that, that person goes from a $500 apartment to a $1,500 apartment. So that $1,000 disappears. You can actually do something about that though, right? You can put that into legislation. You can actually make it so that people in these circumstances can keep their house. Like, this is something we actually can do. This is not an either or, all or nothing. This is not a binary situation. This is a situation in which you do one thing and you do another thing. Similarly, what happens to other people is they have an apartment and they catch wind that you've got more money, they raise your rent. We can make it so that they don't. There was another case of this, was what happened when we started doing more scholarships and sort of government support of education in the 90s. And what happened was we saw skyrocketing rates of tuition at colleges and universities, and they were raising them all far above the rate of inflation. And they were doing that on purpose, because if a person suddenly was getting $6,000 more than they were the year before, if they just raised their costs $6,000, they could just take that. And they did. We don't have to let that happen, right? It's not just the one, it's others. It's all of it. So if this friend of mine had been able to speak with me, I would have said simply, yeah, I want to explore all of these options. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of things that are in between this extreme, guns everywhere, and this extreme, no guns anywhere. There's a lot of room in between those two extremes, and we can find places where we can agree, or there are things that we can do. And I think if we do a bunch of them together, it could have a real dramatic impact on all our lives in ways that are positive and affirming, and prevent 12, 24, 38 more people from dying the next time something happens. That eagerness to find a simple single solution, one that a political party gets to hang their hat on, is itself, that is the most dangerous of all things, because it leads us to do nothing. It's 1,000 things, my friends. It is 1,000 things. And it doesn't need to be intimidating. We need not think that this is the worst thing to ever happen. We can find this to be comforting, because then we don't have to find the best solution. We just have to come up with a few things that work together, and then we can get started. Just do those things, see what happens, and hopefully some harm is reduced and lives are better. We just need to get started. There's so much more we can do when it's 1,000 than when it's 1. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next time.